What you're about to watch is a video of me trying to explain parts of translation theories and studies. I do this in order to fulfill the final assignment of the translation theory class conducted by Mr. Agus in my 5th semester. So, if you'd like to bear with me for like, I don't know, 30 seconds or the entire video, that would be nice. Without further ado, and signing on, it's Raden, Daffa, and...
Thank you!
Alright, guess we're doing this. Let's ride!
Hi, back again with me. So before we begin about the explanation of translation studies, we should know first about what is translation. Well, it's very simple actually. Translation means the transferring of a work or a text from one language to another language. Translation study is a field that deals with the theory, description and application of the translation process itself. It can also be described as an interdiscipline that touches other fields of knowledge such as cultural studies, gender studies, computer science, history, and so on and so on, because it can be examined not only as interlingual transfer of language but also can be described as intercultural forms of communication. It can also be paired, not can, but often be paired with interpreting, although both are distinct in fields. Translation study is divided into two branches. The first is pure translation and then the second is applied translation. So, in this part, we're going to discuss the pure translation first. Pure translation studies has two main objectives: to describe the phenomenon of translation and translating as they manifest themselves and establish general principles at which phenomenon can be explained later. And it has two branches, again, descriptive and the theoretical translation studies. Descriptive translation studies, or as we know as DTS. This branch maintains the closest contact with empirical phenomenon in understudy of the translation itself. I mean, the pure translation. It is divided again into three parts. The first is product-oriented DTS, and this area focuses on existing work of translation. So the text and stuffs, because you know, product of translation is the translation itself. Next we have function-oriented DTS. So in this area, the translation, the method focuses on contextual meaning rather than the text itself, because you know, the function of translation. So they assess the purpose of the translation, etc., etc. And the last one, we have process-oriented DTS. So this area focuses on the process of the act of translation. So I think this emphasizes more on the translator rather than the translation itself, because you know, the translator are the core process, are the core machine of the process of translation. Yeah, it's something like that. I can't really explain it. I just have it in my language and what's on my mind, but I hope you get my point. Okay, I won't really go sharply detailed on theoretical translation because the sun is going down and I have to move to another room, which I don't think will be aesthetically pleasing, but I'm really sorry, but I'm just gonna go brief because I'm going to be more detailed on the applied translation, I hope. So theoretical translation is a method that uses DTS previously and additional information, and this study will determine and try to evolve themselves in theories, principles, models, and of translation. And it is divided into two sub-branches, general and partial. And the partial part is divided again into, I think, 6 sub-branches. That is medium restricted translation, such as human translation, human plus machine translation, and the machine translation. And then we have area restricted translation. We have text type restricted, rank restricted. What's the other two? Time restricted and problem restricted. So I guess that ends the first part of our video. So let's move on to the next part because I'm going to continue it tonight. Just like pure translation, I don't find a definitive definition of the actual applied translation itself, except a citation from James Holmes in which he cites something by someone with the last name of Bacon, I don't know who he is, which says that it emphasizes more of a use of instead of light of. I don't understand what that means, and I don't think anyone does. Translator training, or also known simply as the teaching of translation. I know, it's very simple, it's that simple. I don't make the rules, so don't ask me why, because it is what it is. The application of this teaching method is something that extends beyond the applied translation. And this translation has two types which has to be distinguished very carefully. The first one is for the old techniques in learning foreign languages. This activity has been used since ages and also has been used as a way to test to acquire new languages. So basically, this method says that it has been very helpful in the process of a new acquisition of language, or an acquisition of a new language, to be grammatically correct. I'm sorry. The second method, which is very recent compared to the previous method, is the one used by students at schools or professional translators. However, the situation has raised so many questions that primarily revolves around teaching methods, testing techniques, and curriculum planning. To answer these questions, I think experts need to do more research, because it's obvious that the search for well-founded and reliable answers to these questions constitutes a major area in the applied translation studies field. So, I don't know, maybe we should just wait until the experts gave our legitimate answers and then be satisfied with it. Translation aids. This method is both used by translator training and also to meet the requirements of the practicing translators. The requirements of its practicing translators are variously but mainly fall into two classes, lexicological and terminological aids and grammar. However, lexicological aids often goes unused in translation needs, and contrastive grammar developed for language acquisition purposes are not really an adequate substitution for language and variety market translation matching grammars or translations. I don't even understand what I'm talking about, but to summarize things up, there's a need for scholars and experts in the applied translation field to clarify and define what requirements and specific requirements in this translation is. Translation policy. So, before we begin, I have to be honest that, just like translation aids, I don't really understand the definition and the description of the translation policy, because the language is kind of hard to digest, and I'll try my best to explain it to you guys, but if you don't understand, then I sincerely apologize. So let's begin. The task of the translation experts and scholars in this area is to render informed advice to others in defining the place and roles of the worker, the process, and the result, which are the translators, translating process, and the translations, aka the result. In society at large, where questions like what works need to be translated in a certain social cultural situation and what part of translating should play in the teaching and learning of foreign language, the priority should be given to extensive research to gain efficiency of the translating as a technique and teaching method in language learning. Translation criticism, aka the final child of the applied translation studies. Okay, it should be branch, but child sounds fun, and I just did it now. Whatever. Okay, branch, because it sounds more legitimate, okay? It's kind of living in a different area from the other 3 branches of the applied translation studies. That kind of explains its subtle inclusion in the branching. And the level of such criticism, I mean the translation criticism, is very low. That's why in many countries it's still being overshadowed by other developments in translation methods. However, interpretation and evaluation will always elude the grasp of objective analysis to some extent, continuing the attitude and the essence of critics, but closer contact between translation scholars and critics could do a great deal in reducing the intuitive element to a more acceptable level of translation work.